very pleased to have you with us, Simon. Thank you for coming all the way from Santa Barbara. But Simon is a mystery writer. He spent 20 years practicing law in London, first as a solicitor, then as a barrister, primarily defending criminal defense. At Oxford, he studied history, and he loves to explore in his writing how the past influences the present. His first novel, Final Witness, was published in 2002, and Library Journal said it was an excellent courtroom drama with well-drawn and believable characters. The Inheritance followed in 2010, and just recently he published The King of Diamonds. His book reflects the world he knows, history and crime. After 20 years of both prosecuting and defending criminals, Simon told me crime's what he knows. While he didn't start out to be a writer, he found himself pursuing that passion after his 40th birthday. He certainly has found his unique voice in his books, one that is distinct and different from his well-known grandfather. So the mystery genre. So let's give a big OC welcome to Simon Tolkien as he talks about becoming a writer in the shadow of J R.R. Tolkien.
Well, hello everybody. Sorry. Suddenly. My experience in public speaking is far less as a writer than as a lawyer. And what I'm used to is staring down the faces of juries and trying to get there to say that the guy who's sitting behind me didn't do the heinous offence of which he's been accused. And it's a strange experience because you're pushing the jurors really, really, really hard, but they don't say anything. In England, we have no jury selection process. It is entirely random. So you never know anything about these people. They just sit there, they listen to you, and you throw everything that you've got at them. Your client gets up in the witness box, and you address them, and they hold the fate of your man, your lady in their hands. And then they come back, and you haven't got a clue what they're going to say. And I always remember, as a defense barrister, above the judge's head, in every English court, there's a big picture, I don't know why it's there, of the lion and the unicorn. And I would stare up at the lion and the unicorn, and I would go, not guilty, not guilty, not guilty, not guilty. And they would pay no attention, and they would say, it's guilty. And that was it. It was all done. So that's my experience, is talking to juries. But you're not a jury, you're friendly, and I've talked to a lot of you, so it's going to be easier, I think. I said we had a kind of like seminar situation, discussion last night, and we were all asked to introduce ourselves. And the first thing I said was that I'm kind of strange because I didn't write a word of fiction until the year 2000, when I was 41. So up until that time, I was absolutely convinced that I couldn't write. I never really analysed that very much. Since then I have analysed it a bit, but I was absolutely sure of one thing, that I couldn't do anything involving creative writing. So I had never submitted a piece to a magazine. I had never written a short story. I had never attended a writer's group. And I just sat down and began. So I think it's a good and inspiring story, I hope, for everyone here as they're starting off on the road to becoming writers, sometimes later in life. And of course, there's been a big change for me in the last 10 years. 10 years ago, I was, as I say, addressing juries, trying to either prosecute and defend in England, or address juries and do my job as a barrister. I'd never been to California in my life. And now here I am, and I live in Santa Barbara, and I've written 3 novels. I've written Final Witness, which was in 2002, and then The Inheritance, and then most recently, The King of Diamonds, which has just come out. So, I think that looking back on my life, I suppose what I feel most of all is that strange things happen, even if you stay on familiar paths, and roads open up that perhaps you didn't expect. Years ago, I went to Oxford University, and I studied modern history at Trinity College, and I thought the world was a huge and exciting place, and I wanted to go single-handed up and down the Amazon in a small boat and write about my experiences. And my father and other people said, no you don't, you get a job, you get qualified, this is not a friendly world, you need to be a professional person. And so I thought he was right, and he probably was back then, and I became what they call a solicitor. And because it's a different system in England than it is here, we have 2 types of lawyer. We don't just have attorneys. We have solicitors who prepare cases, and we have barristers who present them in court. And as some of you may be aware from watching, I mean, I know you were watching Westminster Abbey yesterday. You know, the English can get dressed in some pretty weird costumes. And, you know, you wore a wig which was made of horsehair, gown, bands, and all this weird costume. But I started off not doing that. I was a solicitor. What solicitors do is they prepare cases. They don't present them. And I prepared the cases, and the guy in front would get up in his fabulous costume and would be the one who would argue with the jury. And I guess the big moment for me was when I said, I'm going to be the one that stands up. And so I switched, which was hard and tough and a big risk, from being a solicitor to being a barrister. And then once I became a barrister, the law, which had started off, when I started off doing the law, I was buying and selling real estate, you know, the trading, seriously not interesting, from the creative standpoint. I'd gone from there, and followed the law through, started preparing criminal cases, and suddenly there I was, you know, everything depends on you. And it's really exciting, extremely stressful. You know, you see your client in prison, you prepare his case, you put him on the stand, or you don't put him on the stand, and you try and persuade the jury, and you write closing speeches, and everything depends on you. And that was exciting and wonderful. And I really enjoyed it, and I felt I really achieved something. And that went on. And then I started to think, well, no, it's not enough, you know, and I need to do something else. And I guess this links in with what I was saying about not having thought that I could do anything creative, which I'd never really examined up till then. And what happened, I guess, which made me change direction, was the Peter Jackson films of The Lord of the Rings, which started coming onto the horizon in the late 90s. And I don't know if anybody in this room has had this experience, but the Jackson films were like a juggernaut, and they were coming straight at you, and they were saying, your grandfather is responsible with Peter Jackson for this huge thing, and it was on all the TV channels, you couldn't get away from it, it was everywhere. And so I started to think, who am I want to be somebody too. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, or whether it's just, you know, wanting your own chunk of fame, but that was really motivating to me, to actually make something of my own. And I guess it, you know, it combined with the millennium and all that. And so it was at that moment when the Jackson films started that I thought that I should try to write. And I guess as the years went on from there, I started to think, as I'm sure some of you think, about why didn't I write before? Some of the people I met this morning, you're only starting to write, you know, when you're 50, 60, 40. And I look back and I think that what stopped me writing was my grandfather. And he was a very nice man. That kind of is undescriptive. I have a pretty vivid memory of him doing the stuff that grandfathers do, skimming stones in the sea. We play weird games, like we come up with an incredibly long word like Constantinople, and then we would both of us sit there in the hotel in Bournemouth and see how many words we could get out of it. But this doesn't take you into the genesis of the Lord of the Rings. It's the kind of things you do with your grandfather. So those were, you know, good experiences, and I had a good experience with him and a good sense of him. But what he had become is he had become, not through his own fault, but through his own achievement, for me, an inhibitor. He was inhibiting me from doing anything creative. And it was partly the fact that he'd written The Lord of the Rings and everybody said this was the greatest book ever. In fact, we had a big competition recently where they did say that. And it was partly that he had this incredible intellectual capacity. He was a professor of English at Oxford. He spoke 12 languages. His books, I don't know how many of you know the Lord of the Rings, but his books have extraordinary depth because they came out of language. All the people who write science fiction these days, they start with a story. Why J R.R. Tolkien was unique is because he started with language. He knew what the people spoke. He said this. He knew what the people spoke before he decided what they did. He made up the stories because he already could hear them. That's why there is this enormous depth in his books. And then, you know, after he died, in 1973, my father, who was a fellow, as we call it, a teacher at Oxford University as well, he gave up his job. He devoted his life, and has devoted his life very laudably, to putting together all that my grandfather had left behind, which was immense. I remember after his death, all these files of papers unpublished. And so this was really seriously hard to deal with. You know, who are you? If you've got, if he's that, what are you? You know, stick to the law. So, I charged out to the new path, ironically, as I say, because of these films and them being such a juggle. And maybe I wouldn't have done, this is again not, but maybe I wouldn't have done if I'd known just how hard it was going to be. Because I reckon that you could sit down and write a novel. So I did that. It's kind of autobiographical. It was about this crazy English lawyer who was in a terrible job, and his wife insisted on sending their son to an awful boarding school from which he had to rescue the son. And it was kind of crazy and farcical, and it wasn't any good. But I kind of didn't know that at the time, and I thought, you know, here we go. And this was like 2001, so I sent it off to all these agents, because my wife was American. I thought, you've got to go to America, you know, so America is always a big place for me. So I sent it off to all these agents in New York, and many of them didn't apply. And eventually, it just didn't work. And so I had it in me, and I guess we all have a certain amount of fuel in our engine. I had it in me to write another one. When I wrote the next one, I made a good decision, which is that, and I talked to some of you this morning about this, is that I went for what I knew. I went for the law. So there's all these kind of ironies in my life. The law, which had been constricting, was also the right to creativity. It was strange.